Welcome back to Echo Horror Files. Before we enter tonight's terrifying story, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Brett Carpenter. Before I take you up that ridge with me, do one small thing first. Down in the comments, tell me the name of the town you are sitting in tonight, and tell me the time your own clock is reading as you listen to my voice. I like knowing who is out there awake in the gloom with me while I let this story loose. And if you happen to be the kind of person who keeps one light burning after everyone else in the house has gone to bed, then you have found the right place. So pull the blanket up to your chin and stay close, because I am only going to tell this the once. I want to be honest about who we were when we drove up into that country. Because the kind of people we were is the whole reason it found us. We were the kind of people who thought we already knew. Every summer for 9 years, I had taken the same loose group of us out into the high places, and every summer we came back down again with sunburn and a few good photographs and the comfortable feeling of having beaten something. We had walked the Smokies. We had slept above the tree line in 3 states. We had outlasted a lightning storm on a bald once, all of us laughing about it before our clothes were even dry. So when my great-uncle Howard finally told me about the Hollow, I heard it the way I heard everything in those years, which is to say I heard it as a thing to be done rather than a thing to be feared. Howard Powell was 72 that summer, and he was the only one of us who had any right to be afraid. He had been born in a cabin not 9 miles from the trailhead, back when there were still people living up in those folds of land who had never once driven a car. He had left as a young man and never gone back, and in all the years I knew him, he had never offered to take me. I had to ask. I had to ask 3 times. The third time, he looked at me for a long moment over the rim of his coffee, and then he said a thing I did not understand until much later. He said, "All right, but you remember that I told you it was a hard country, and that hard is not the same as dead." I thought he meant the terrain. There were 6 of us in the end. There was me, 41 years old that year, and certain of myself in a way that shames me now. There was Howard, slow on his feet but sharp as a fishhook behind the eyes, the only true mountain man any of us had ever met. There was Vanessa Rice, 54, who had been my friend since before either of us had gray in our hair. Vanessa was a nurse, and she had the gift that the best nurses have, which is the ability to look at a frightening thing without flinching and tell you exactly how bad it is. She was the one I trusted to be calm. She was the one who lived. There was Jenna Long, 35, who had come up to take pictures. Jenna shot wildlife for a living, and she carried a camera the way the rest of us carried our own hands, without thinking about it, always lifting it, always framing the world into something she could keep. There was Curtis Patterson, 63, who was a hunter to the bone and proud of it, a barrel of a man with a laugh that filled a room and a habit of treating the woods like a store he had a coupon for. And Curtis had brought his dogs. 2 red-bone hounds named Dutch and Belle, good, honest animals, the kind that would walk into a hole in the ground after a thing twice their size and never think twice. Hold on to those dogs in your mind. You will want to remember them later. The last of us was not really one of us at all. Her name was Peggy Bryant, and she was 78, and she ran the last store before the road turned to gravel and then to dirt and then to nothing. I have to tell you about Peggy because Peggy tried. The store was a single low room with a porch sagging off the front of it and a hand-painted sign that had given up most of its letters. We stopped there for ice and for the kind of small talk you make with the last human being you expect to see for a week. Peggy sold us the ice. She rang up our snacks on a register older than I was, and then while Curtis was loading the cooler back into the truck and laughing about something, she set both her hands flat on the counter and she looked at Howard, and Howard looked back at her, and something passed between those 2 old people that the rest of us were too young and too loud to read. "Powell," she said. Just his name. She said it like a question and an accusation at the same time. "Bryant," Howard said, "you are going up the High Hollow. I am taking my nephew up to see where I was a boy." Peggy nodded slowly. She had a way of nodding that did not agree with anything. "Pretty up there in the summer," she said. "Real pretty. We do not generally go up that way this time of year, though." And she let that sit on the counter between them like a thing she had placed there on purpose. "We do not generally go up that way this time of year." I heard a piece of small mountain custom. What she meant, I understand now, was something closer to "please do not make me bury your nephew." Vanessa felt it. She told me later that she felt it the whole time we were in the store, a pressure behind her teeth like the air before weather. But Curtis was already in the truck, And the day was burning, and so we said our thank you and we drove up out of the last of the world. I will tell you the truth. The first day was glorious. I have never in my life seen green like that green. The hollow ran up between two long ridges, and a creek ran down the middle of it, cold and loud, and everything that could grow grew over everything else until you could not always tell the ground from the air. Jenna nearly fell into the creek twice because she was looking through her camera instead of at her feet. Dutch and Belle ran themselves stupid with joy. Even Howard seemed lighter up there, younger, his hand trailing along the trunks of trees the way you touch the shoulders of people you have not seen in a long time. The cabin was Howard's family place, or what was left of it. It had stood empty for 50 years and it showed, but the roof held and the walls were honest, and there was a stone hearth in it that had been laid by hands 100 years dead. We swept it out. We laid our bags along the walls. By the time the light started to go thick and gold and the creek noise turned from cheerful to something more like a held breath, we had a fire going in that ancient hearth, and we were as happy as I have ever been with other people. That was the night Howard told the story. I have asked myself 1,000 times since whether he told it as a warning or as a kind of prayer, and I still do not know. He waited until the fire had burned down to the talking stage, the stage where the flames stop performing and just sit there breathing orange. Curtis had been going on about a bear he had taken in Canada, and there was a lull, and into that lull Howard said very quietly, "There was a thing my grandfather warned us about when I was small. We were not allowed to say its whole name after the sun went down. The old people only called it the tail, or the long tail, because that is the part of it that matters." Jenna lowered her camera. Vanessa stopped poking the fire. Even Curtis went still, which for Curtis was a kind of miracle. "My grandfather lived in this very hollow," Howard said. "And one winter, a hard one, a thing came down out of the high rocks and got in under his door while he slept. Now my grandfather was not a man who scared. He woke with it standing on his chest, and he did not freeze. He reached for the hatchet he kept by the bed, and in the gloom he swung at the part of it he could reach, and what he cut off was its tail. The thing screamed and went out under the door and up the slope. And my grandfather, who was hungry, who had been hungry all that winter, did a foolish thing. He had a piece of meat in his hand that he had taken off something that was not his to take. So he cooked it, and he ate it. The fire popped. Nobody laughed. That night, Howard said, it came back. It sat outside the cabin in the black, and it called to him. It did not roar. It said, plain as I am saying it to you, give me back my tail. And my grandfather had no tail to give because the tail was gone down inside him. So the thing took something else. It took his old dog, the one that slept on the porch, took it without a sound. The next night it came again. Give me back my tail. And it took the second dog. And the third night it came, and there were no dogs left, and the cabin was very quiet. And my grandfather lay in his bed and listened to it come in under the door. Howard reached out then and put another stick on the fire, very carefully, like a man who did not want to be sitting in the dim when he finished. My grandfather lived, he said. He was the only one in 3 generations who ever met it and lived. And do you know why he lived? Because the old woman down the mountain, the one whose people had been here longest, she told him the only thing there is to know. She told him this, and I want all of you to hear it the way she said it, because up here it is not a story, it is a law. He looked around the fire at each of us. He looked at me last. The hollow lens, Howard said. It does not give. Whatever you take out of it, it will come to collect. All of it, down to the last. There was a silence then that the creek filled but did not break. And Curtis Patterson, who was a good man in most of the ways that count and a fool in exactly one, leaned back against his pack and grinned at the firelight, and he said, well, lucky for us, nobody here is planning to cut anything's tail off. We laughed. God forgive us, we laughed. I lay awake a while that night. I told myself it was the strange floor and the cold coming up out of the old stones. But it was the dogs. Dutch and Belle had bedded down by the door, the way good dogs do. And somewhere past the middle of the night, I felt them both come up off the floor at the same instant, not barking, not growling, just up, both of them, rigid, their faces pointed at the same black square of window. I held my breath. The creek ran on. After a long time, the dogs lay back down. But Dutch did not sleep. I could see his eyes in the last of the fire, open, fixed on the door, all the rest of that night, and I understood without any words for it that the dog had heard something out there in the gloom that the rest of us, in our cleverness, had not yet earned the right to hear. The trouble started, the way trouble so often does, with a kindness that turned greedy. Our food was meant to last the week with margin, but on the second day a bag burst in the creek crossing, and we lost most of our dry goods to the water and the rocks. It was nobody's fault. It was the kind of thing that happens. But it put a thin, worried edge on the group, and it put a gleam in Curtis Patterson's eye, because here at last was a reason for him to do the thing he had been itching to do since the truck. Curtis wanted to hunt. He had brought a rifle and the dogs and a lifetime of skill, and now he had a noble reason to use them, which is the most dangerous kind of reason a man like Curtis can be handed. Howard did not want him to. I watched my great-uncle try, in the careful way of old men, to talk Curtis out of it without ever saying out loud that he was afraid. "We can walk back down to Peggy's in a day and a half," Howard said. "No need to take anything from up here." And Curtis clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Howard, with respect, I have been feeding myself off the land since before you sold your first truck," which was not true, but which ended the conversation. 2 layers under those friendly words I could hear the real exchange. Howard was saying, "Do not do this." Curtis was saying, "I will not be told what to do by an old man in a ghost story." So Curtis took the dogs up the slope after lunch, and Jenna went with him to take pictures of the country, and the rest of us stayed near the cabin. It was a fine, bright afternoon. I want you to hold that in your mind, how ordinary and bright it was, because I have noticed that the worst things do not announce themselves with weather. They come on the good days. They were back before the light failed, and they were both changed. Jenna's face had gone a color I did not have a name for. Curtis was loud in a way that was working too hard to be loud, and slung over his shoulder on a strap was something wrapped in his jacket that was the wrong shape for anything he should have killed. He had gotten it with a snare, he said, up among the high rocks where the trees gave out. Dutch had treed it or run it to ground. The story changed a little each time he told it. It was about the size of a large cat, but it was not a cat, and it was not a fox, and it was not anything that Curtis, with all his decades, could put a name to. Its fur was the gray of wet ash. Its hands, and I will call them hands because that is what they were, had too many joints in the fingers and a black hooked claw at the end of each one. And it had a tail, a long, heavy, ringed tail nearly as long as the rest of it together, thick as my wrist at the base, and that tail was the thing Curtis could not stop looking at. He laid the body out on the flat rock by the creek in the last of the light, and he took out his good knife, the one with the bone handle that he kept sharp enough to shave with, and before any of us understood what he meant to do, he cut the tail off. He did it cleanly, the way he did everything, one long pull of the blade, and he held it up, dripping, grinning, and he said, "Now that is a trophy. I will get that mounted, and it will hang in my den until I am dead." I looked at Howard. Howard had gone the gray of the creature's fur. He did not say a single word. He turned and he walked back into the cabin, and he sat down against the far wall, and he did not come out for the meat, because Curtis cooked it. We were hungry, our food was in the creek, and there was meat, and Curtis was a man who did not believe in waste. He skinned it, and he spitted it, and he roasted it over the fire, and the smell of it was not bad. It was the worst part. It smelled like any game. It smelled like dinner. Curtis ate his fill. Jenna would not touch it. Vanessa ate a little, I think because she was a nurse and a practical woman, and the rest of us were watching, and she did not want anyone to panic over a story. I ate a little too. I am not proud of it. To this day there is a taste I cannot put a name to that comes back to me when I am very tired, and I know exactly where I first tasted it. The tail Curtis hung from a nail driven into the cabin wall, above where he would sleep, the way you hang a thing you are proud of so that it is the first thing you see when you wake. That night it came. I had been asleep, deep, the heavy, dreamless sleep of a body that has walked all day. What woke me was the dogs, and the dogs were not barking. That is what I want you to understand. Dutch and Belle were not barking. They were making a sound I had never heard a dog make and have never heard since, a high, thin keening with their mouths almost shut, pressed flat to the floorboards by the door, shaking. Curtis sat up and told them to hush. They did not hush. And then, out in the black beyond the window, Over the steady wash of the creek, something spoke. It did not roar. I keep telling you that because I keep needing you to feel it the way I felt it. It did not roar. It spoke, in a voice that was almost a voice that had learned its words by listening at doors, and it said, drawn out and patient and horribly calm, Telipo, give back my Telipo. Nobody moved. The fire had burned to coals and threw just enough light to see each of us by. Every face turned the same way, toward the door, toward the sound. Curtis was the first to find his courage, or his pride, which in him were the same thing. Some animal, he said too loud. Some animal got at a calf somewhere and learned to mimic. But his hand was already on his rifle. Give back my Telipo. Closer now. At the door. I could hear it breathing through the gap at the bottom, a long, slow, wet draw. And I could hear something dragging slowly across the boards of the porch, back and forth, the way a cat will lash a tail it no longer has. And then Dutch broke. The big red-bone hound, the brave one, the one that would go down any hole, he could not bear it anymore. He scrambled up and he threw himself at the door, and he wanted out, he wanted at it, every instinct he had screaming go. And before Curtis could grab his collar, the old latch gave and the door swung wide into the black, and Dutch went out. He made it perhaps 4 steps. We heard his feet on the boards. We heard him start to bay, that deep, beautiful sound, cut off in the middle as if a hand had closed over it. And then we heard nothing at all from Dutch ever again. Belle did not follow him. Belle crawled backward into the corner and pressed herself into it and made herself as small as a dog her size can make herself. And she stared at the open door, and Curtis stood there in the firelight with his rifle and could not make himself step toward the dark to look for his dog. I got the door shut. I do not remember crossing the room to do it. I remember my hands on the cold wood, and I remember that the latch was broken now, sheared clean through, so I dragged Curtis's pack against it and then my own on top of that, as if our gear could keep out a thing that had taken a 60-pound hound without a sound. Howard had not gotten up. He was sitting against the far wall, exactly where he had sat down at dusk, and his eyes were open and shining in the cold light, and he was saying something under his breath over and over. The same few words, a rhythm, and when I crawled to him and put my ear close, I understood that he was reciting it like a prayer, the thing the old woman had told his grandfather, the law of the place. The hollow lends, it does not give. Whatever you take, it comes to collect. All of it, down to the last. And out beyond the broken door, patient as winter, the voice came again, soft now, almost tender. A thing that knew it had all the time in the world. Telipo, it said. I will be back tomorrow night. You still have something of mine. We did not sleep. You do not after a thing like that. We sat up the rest of that night in a tight knot by the dead fire, all 5 of us and the one dog, and when the first gray light finally came up the hollow and turned the window from black to the color of a bruise, it did not feel like rescue. It felt like a recess. It felt like being let out of a room you were going to be put back into. In the daylight, we found Dutch. Or we found what the daylight let us find of him, which was a long smear across the porch boards leading off into the brush, and one thing left behind at the end of it that I will not describe to you, because you are listening to this somewhere with a light on, and I do not need to put that picture into your night. Curtis knelt over it for a long time and did not make a sound. When he stood up, he was a different man. The bigness had gone out of him. He had aged a decade between dusk and dawn, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked at Howard not with the easy contempt of a strong man for an old one, but with the naked desperation of a child. How do we fix it? Curtis said. Howard, how did your grandfather fix it? And Howard looked at him, and there was no I told you so in my great uncle. There was only sorrow, and he said, my grandfather did not fix it, son. My grandfather survived it. There is a difference, and you are not going to like it. We held a council on that porch in the thin morning light, with the creek running and the birds carrying on like nothing had happened, which was its own kind of horror, that the world could be so unbothered. Howard told us the rest of what the old woman had told his grandfather, the part of the law that he had left out by the fire because at the fire it had still been a story. It collects what you took, Howard said. All of it. You ate of it. There is nothing to be done about what you ate. It is yours now, and it is gone. and that is a debt that will be paid in some other coin some other day, but not tonight. Tonight it wants the tail. The tail is the part it can still get back whole. So you give it back the tail. You do not throw it out into the brush. You do not bury it. You carry it to the threshold where it came calling, and you set it down whole, and you say plainly, "Here is what was taken, I give it back." And then you do not touch one single thing of this place ever again, not a stone, not a feather. You go down off this mountain with nothing in your hands and nothing in your pockets but what you carried up, empty. Do you understand me? You leave it the way you found it, all of it, down to the last, and the hollow lets you leave. Vanessa Rice was the one who held us together. I have to give her that. While Curtis sat broken and Jenna sat silent with her camera dead in her lap, and I argued with myself about whether any of it was even real, Vanessa simply went and took the tail down off the nail where it hung above Curtis's bed, and she wrapped it carefully in a clean shirt the way she would have dressed a wound, and she said, in the calm, flat voice of a woman reading you a diagnosis, "Then that is what we do. We give it back at the door tonight, and we leave at first light, and we touch nothing. Everyone empties their pockets right now. Everything that came off this mountain goes back on this mountain. Brett, you first. I want to tell you that I emptied my pockets. I want to tell you that with everything in me, you should know a thing about me, the thing I have been ashamed of for most of my life. Everywhere I have ever gone, I have taken a small piece of it, a pebble, a shell, a bit of bark. I called it my pocket of proof, my evidence that I had been somewhere and that it had been real. My pockets on any given day were a museum of the places I had stood, and on the first morning in that hollow, walking the bright creek with everything still good and green and ahead of us, I had bent down and picked up a small thing off the rocks and dropped it in my pocket without a thought, the way I had done 10,000 times before. It was a claw, a single small black hooked claw, washed up clean and gleaming on the stones, and I had thought, in the way of a fool, what a strange and perfect thing, and I had kept it. When Vanessa told us to empty our pockets, I put my hand on it, and I did not take it out. I have asked myself why for the rest of my life. The best answer I have is the most human and the most damning one. It was so small, it was the size of my thumbnail. It was nothing. Surely nothing meant the claw. Surely the tail was the debt, and one tiny washed-up claw off the creek bed was not the debt, was not even noticed, was mine to keep. I emptied the rest of my pockets onto the porch boards in a little pile, a stone and 2 acorns and a curl of birch bark, and I left the claw where it was, warm now against my leg, and I told myself it did not count. That is the inversion the old law warns you about, and that no one ever quite believes until it is too late. All of it, down to the last. The law does not care which thing you decide is small. Night came up the hollow the way the tide comes in, and we were ready in the only way we could be. We had the fire built high. We had Belle pressed against Vanessa's leg. We had the tail, wrapped clean, sitting just inside the broken door, and the plan was simple and almost laughable in its simplicity. When it came and called, Vanessa would open the door, set the tail down on the threshold, say the words, and step back, give back what was taken, let it leave. It came earlier than the night before. The fire was still high when Belle began to keen, and the voice came up out of the gloom, and it was not patient anymore. It was hungry. "Talipo," it said, and it was already at the door. "Give back my Talipo." Vanessa Rice stood up. I will see her do this for the rest of my life. She did not rush and she did not falter. She walked to that door with the wrapped tail in her 2 hands, and she dragged the packs aside, and she pulled the broken door open into the black, and she knelt and she set the tail down on the threshold, on the very boards where it had been cut from its owner the day before, and she said in that calm, flat, steady voice, "Here is what was taken. We give it back, all of it." And for one long-held breath, I believed her. I believed it would be enough. There was a silence so complete that I could hear the blood in my own ears, and into that silence came a sound I can only describe as satisfaction, a low, long exhale out there in the dark, and then a soft scrape as something lifted the tail off the boards, and then nothing. It had taken it back. It was over. Vanessa stood and stepped back and shut the door, and Jenna let out a sob, And Curtis put his face in his hands, and even Howard let his shoulders come down from around his ears, and I thought, we have done it, we have paid, we are going home. Then the voice spoke one more time. And this is the part I have never told anyone until tonight, until this very moment, with whatever town you are in, glowing on your clock as you listen. The voice did not go away. It came back to the door, soft, almost puzzled, almost sad, and it said, all of it, down to the last. And then it said my name. I do not know how it knew my name. I have stopped trying to know. The claw in my pocket had gone from warm to burning cold, and I understood, the way you understand a thing in a dream the instant before it eats you, exactly what I had done. I tore it out of my pocket. I screamed something. I think I screamed, give it back. Here, take it, and I scrambled for that door to throw the claw out into the night where it belonged, to make my debt right the way Vanessa had made hers. But the others did not understand. They saw me, wild-eyed, lunging for the door we had just sealed, the door we had all agreed must stay shut. And Curtis, poor broken Curtis, trying so hard to be brave again, Curtis caught me and held me back. He thought he was saving me. He held me with all his great strength away from that door while I fought him, and the claw bit into my palm, and the door, which I had not latched because there was no latch left to latch, the door drifted slowly open on its own. What came through it came for the thing it was owed. It did not come for me. That is the part the law had not bothered to mention, the part that has kept me out of churches and out of the company of decent people for the rest of my days. It collects the debt, but it does not always collect from the one who owes it. It took Curtis Patterson, who was holding me, who was between me and the open door, who had eaten of it and cut it and earned it 10 times over, but who in that last second was simply the warm body closest to the dark. I have spared you, Dutch. I will spare you, Curtis, too, all but the sound I told you about at the very beginning, the low, wet, steady arguing sound of a man who knows what is happening and cannot stop it. That sound is the toll I pay every night for the claw I would not give up. The rest of us lived. I want you to have that much since you have stayed with me this long. Vanessa got the door shut and got us through the rest of that endless night, and at the gray of dawn we went down off that mountain, 4 of us and 1 dog, and we touched nothing, and we did not look back, and we did not stop until we reached Peggy Bryant's store. Peggy was on the porch. I think she had been on the porch all night. She did not ask us what had happened. She looked at our 4 faces and the empty places where 2 more should have been, and she looked at Howard, and she only said, "How much did it get back?" "All of it," Howard told her, but the boy kept one thing. He gave it up at the end. And Peggy looked at me for a long, long time, with no unkindness in it, only a terrible old sorrow. And she said the thing I have carried ever since. She said, "Giving it back late is not the same as never taking it, son. You set the debt down, but you do not get to choose when it has finished being collected." Howard Powell died 4 years later, in his own bed, in town, far from any hollow, and I was glad for him. Jenna Long does not speak to me, and I do not blame her, and I hope wherever she has found a way to put her camera down at night. Vanessa Rice and I talk on the phone sometimes, 2 old friends with gray in our hair, and we never once mention it, and the not mentioning it is the whole conversation. Belle, the red-bone hound, lived to be old and gentle, and she would never again go through any door after the sun went down. And me. I went home. I threw the claw into the deepest river I could find, waded in a coffee can full of concrete, and I told myself that was the end of it. For years, I almost believed it. But here is why I am telling you the whole of it tonight. The part with my own name in it. The part I have hidden in every other version. It does not need the claw anymore. The claw was only the thread. What I took, what I really took and ate and carried home inside me on that bright second day was a piece of the hollow itself. And that is a debt that is paid in another coin some other day, just as Howard said. I am an old man now. I do not have so many days left to me. And lately, in the thin minute between switching off the lamp and falling asleep, under the wet, steady sound of Curtis that has kept me company all these years, I have begun to hear something new, something at the foot of the bed, something patient, something that has waited a very long time and is in no hurry at all. So tell me your town and the time on your clock, friend, and keep your light burning a while longer, because the company is a comfort, and because I have one last thing to ask of you before you go. If you have ever stood somewhere beautiful and slipped a small piece of it into your pocket as proof that you were really there, a pebble, a shell, a bit of bark, anything at all, then do me this one kindness tonight. Get up, find it, and in the morning take it back. All of it. Down to the last. I have signed a great deal of paper in 22 years on this ridge. Lost permits, citations, search reports written by lantern light with my hands still unsteady. The one report I never filed is the report about Sorrel Hollow, because there is no box on the form for what came down off that mountain, and there is no honest word for the sound it made the night it learned to say a person's name. Before I take you up into that timber with me, I want to know where you are sitting tonight. Write the name of your town in the comments and tell me the hour your clock is showing right now. Because the part of this that still keeps me awake is how ordinary the evening felt, right up until the moment it stopped being ordinary. If quiet, true stories about the high country are the reason you came here, then settle in, keep close, and let me know you are out there. The 6 of them came up the forest road in 2 trucks on the second Friday of August, and I remember thinking they had the look of a family that had planned this for a long time, not the look of people on vacation, the look of people keeping a promise. I was the seasonal backcountry ranger for that district, which meant I knew the trails better than anyone who still had a reason to walk them. The hollow they wanted was not on the map anymore. The agency had let the spur trail close after a slide took out the footbridge, and most folks had forgotten there was ever a homestead back in there at all. But Norman Alexander had not forgotten. Norman was 74, and Sorrel Hollow was where his grandfather had run a few acres of corn and kept a cabin before the timber companies came and the family came down off the mountain for good. He wanted to see the home place one more time before his knee quit on him for good. That was the whole of it. A man near the end of his walking years, wanting to stand in the spot where his people had stood. When Brooke called the office to ask about the old spur, I should have told her no. I have asked myself 100 times why I did not. Brooke Sanders was Norman's granddaughter, 38, the kind of organized that comes from being the one everybody else leans on. She had a satellite messenger clipped to her pack strap, a paper map in a waterproof sleeve, and a checklist she went down with her finger. She had arranged all of it. The trucks, the permits, the food, the people. She had even arranged me. The others I learned across that first afternoon as we walked in. Alvin Jenkins was 68, Norman's oldest friend, a soft-spoken man who carried an old lever rifle slung across his back even though nobody was hunting. When I asked about it, he said a man feels foolish in the timber without something, and then he laughed at himself, and I liked him for it. Irene Griffin was 65, Norman's younger sister, small and bright-eyed, with a hearing aid she fussed at when the wind came up. She heard things in pieces, she told me, and had learned to read the rest off people's faces. She read mine more than once that week, and I wish she had not been so good at it. Felicia Perry was 46, a friend of Brooks, and she was making a record of the trip. She carried a little audio recorder on a lanyard and held it out toward Norman whenever he started talking, because Brooke wanted his stories saved while there was still a Norman to tell them. That recorder is the only reason I can prove any of this to myself. And Darrell Russell was 59, the one who knew these woods nearly as well as I did. He had hunted the next ridge over for 40 years. He walked at the front with me, read the ground the way I read it, and from the first hour he was the one I trusted to keep his head. He was also the one who was quickest to laugh at the idea that there was anything in that hollow but laurel and copperheads. The spur trail was 4 miles of climbing, then a long shelving descent into the hollow itself. By the time the ground began to fall away under us, the light had gone the color of weak tea, and the heat of the day was lifting off the leaves in a smell like wet pennies. We dropped down through a band of hemlock, old growth that the saws had somehow missed, trees so big that 3 of us could not have ringed one with our arms, and the temperature fell with us, and the noise of the world fell away. The trail down was steeper than the map remembered. We went single file, sliding on the loose duff, grabbing roots, and I dropped back to walk beside Irene because the footing was the kind that takes old ankles. She had her hearing aid turned up high for the trail, she told me, because she liked to hear the creek before she saw it, and on the way down she kept stopping to fuss at the little device in her ear, tapping it, pulling it out, and seating it again. There is a buzz in it, she said, almost embarrassed, a kind of hum that comes and goes. I told her it was probably the new altitude. I believe that too. I have a long list of things I believed that day, and every one of them was a small kindness I told myself instead of the truth. Brooke walked at the back where she could keep eyes on everyone, the satellite messenger riding on her shoulder strap, its little screen waking now and then to show one bar, then none, then one again as the ridgeline came and went between us and the sky. She checked it the way some people check a pulse. I did not think anything of it then. I have since come to understand that she was the only one of us who spent that whole trip with a thread out to the rest of the world, and that the thread was thinner than any of us knew. That was the first thing Darrell said that I held on to later. He stopped on the trail, tilted his head, and said, very quietly, that the woods had gone wrong. I asked him what he meant. No birds, he said. Listen. I listened. He was right. We had walked all afternoon inside a wall of birdsong, wood thrushes and towhees, and the high, thin call of warblers up in the canopy. And somewhere on that descent it had simply stopped, not faded, stopped. The hollow below us held a silence that felt less like the absence of sound and more like something large holding its breath. Norman came down behind us, leaning on Brooke, and he heard us talking, and he laughed, but it was not an easy laugh. My grandfather had a saying about this place, he said. Felicia lifted the recorder. He used to say the hollow keeps its own quiet, Norman told us. He said when the timber goes still like this, you mind your manners in it. And he told me, when something in these woods calls you by your name, you do not answer it, and you do not run from it. You go still, and you go heavy, like you have grown roots, and you let it pass. Let what pass? Irene asked. She had only caught half of it. Norman patted her hand. Whatever is calling, he said. Darrell snorted and started down the trail again, and I went with him, and I told myself it was a grandfather's tale, the kind of thing the old people used to say to keep children from wandering off. I have made a long career out of telling people that the woods are not out to get them. The woods do not hate you. The woods do not even know you are there. I believed that on the way down into Sorrel Hollow. I want that written somewhere. I believed it. The home place was nothing now. A hearthstone in a chimney fall, a depression where the root cellar had been, an old apple tree gone wild and twisted at the edge of what had once been the yard. But Norman stood in the middle of it with his hat in his hands, and he was crying without any shame at all. And the rest of them gathered close and let him have his moment, and even Darrell took his cap off. We made camp 20 yards up the slope on a flat bench above the creek in the last good light, and for an hour it was the trip they had all come for. A fire. Norman's stories, Felicia's recorder turning, coffee, and Irene laughing at something Alvin said, her face turned to catch it. Alvin sat a little apart from the rest, the old rifle laid across his knees, and at some point in that hour he told me a piece of himself without meaning to. He said he had lost his wife 2 springs back, and that she had loved the high country more than he ever had, and that he had carried the rifle up here because it had been her father's, and a man does foolish things to feel near somebody who is gone. He said the woods were the one place he could still hear her if he was quiet enough. I thought it was a tender thing for a grieving man to say. I had no way of knowing the hollow had been listening to every word, and that grief in that place was not a comfort but a door. Norman told the old stories with Felicia's recorder held out toward him. The home place stories, who had been born on that hearth and who had died on it, the year the corn failed and the year the bear came down. And under all of it the creek talked, steady and ordinary, the way mountain water does, and the firelight pushed the gloom back to the edge of the bench, and for a while the trip was exactly what they had driven all that way to find. Then the creek noise changed. I am the only one who noticed at first, because noticing water is part of the job. The creek had a voice, the steady talking rush that mountain creeks have, and at some point in the gloom after sundown that voice picked up another note under it, a long, rising, falling cry, far up the hollow. It came in over the water so that for a moment I truly could not tell whether I was hearing the creek do something I had never heard a creek do, or hearing something else entirely. It was a woman. That is the only way I can describe the shape of it. A woman somewhere up in that gut of laurel and rhododendron, crying out, the sound climbing and breaking the way a person sounds when they have been calling for help for a long time and are losing hope of an answer. Brooke was on her feet with the satellite messenger already in her hand. "Somebody is up there," she said. "Somebody is hurt." Daryl had gone very still by the fire. He was looking at me, and I was looking at him, and neither of us said the thing we were both thinking, which was that there was no trail up that side of the hollow. No reason for a person to be a half-mile up a closed drainage in the falling night, and that the cry had not moved the way a hurt person moves. It had not come closer. It had circled. It had gone from up the hollow to across the slope to down near the creek bend and back in the time it takes to drink half a cup of coffee, and no person walks that fast through Laurel in the gloom. Norman had stopped talking. He was holding Irene's hand, and his face had nothing left of the grief on it. It had gone smooth and careful, the face of a man remembering exactly what his grandfather meant. "Felicia," he said, very gently, "turn that off now." She did not. I have thought about that too. She left the recorder running on the log beside the fire, and that is why I know that what came next was real, and not the thing the mind builds in the gloom to frighten itself, because it is on the recording. We all heard it together, around that fire, in the held breath of the hollow, up the slope, in the laurel, in a voice that was not the woman's cry anymore. Something said Norman's name. Nobody moved. I have been in the woods with frightened people. I have pulled them off ledges and out of swollen creeks, and once out from under a fallen man who was already gone. Frightened people make noise. They argue, they cry, they ask the same question 4 times. This was not that. The 6 of them sat around the fire as if the cold had come into their bodies and set, and the only thing moving in that whole camp was the firelight on their faces and Felicia's hand, very slowly, drawing the recorder off the log and into her lap. It said the name again, Norman, drawn out, the way Irene might say it, the way a sister says a brother's name across a room. It was up the slope and to the left of where the woman's cry had been, and it was closer. Brooke broke the spell. She is not built to sit still while something is wrong, and her whole life had taught her that when a voice calls a name in the night, you answer it. She drew a breath to call back, to say, "We are here. Who is up there?" And Norman moved faster than a 74-year-old man with a bad knee has any right to move. He had his hand over her mouth before the first sound left her. "Do not answer it," he whispered. His grandfather's words, exactly. "You do not answer it, and you do not run from it." Daryl had the only clear head besides mine, and he used it. He stood, slow, and he put another armload of wood on the fire so that the light pushed back the gloom another few yards, and he picked up the long-handled camp axe and held it down along his leg where it would not look like a threat, and he spoke low and even. "That is not a person," he said. "A person would have come to the fire. A person who could say his name across a camp could walk into the light. It is staying out where we cannot see it, and it is using a name it heard us say all evening. So nobody answers it. Nobody goes to it. We keep the fire up and we wait for morning and we walk out the way we came in." It was good sense. It was exactly the right thing to say. Alvin had taken the old rifle off his pack and worked the lever, and the small, hard sound of it carried, and out in the laurel the voice stopped. For a long moment there was nothing but the creek and the fire and 6 people breathing. Then it laughed. "I need you to understand that I am not a man who frightens easily, and I am not a man who reaches for the strange explanation." But the laugh that came out of that laurel did not come from anything with a person's throat. It started in the right place, a low chuckle, almost warm, almost Norman's own laugh, the one we had been hearing all evening. And then it went up, and it kept going up, past where a human voice can go, into the long rising scream of a mountain cat, the kind of cry that hunters out here will tell you sounds exactly like a woman being murdered. It held that note far longer than a set of lungs should hold it. And then it came back down, all the way down, into the warm, low chuckle again, as if the thing were trying the sound on, learning where the human part ended and its own part began. Irene had her hand pressed flat against her chest. She could not have heard all of it through the bad ear, and I think that mercy was the only thing that kept her from coming apart. She leaned to Norman and asked him what it was, and Norman, who had grown up on his grandfather's stories, finally told us. "The old people called it the cat that walks like a woman," he said. His voice was steady, which cost him something. The Cherokee had a name for it from long before our people came into these mountains. A woman who put on a cat's hide to creep close to the men and listen to the medicine talk and the hunting magic that women were forbidden to hear. And she was caught at it, and the medicine man laid a curse on her that she would become the thing she wore. Half a woman and half a cat, neither one nor the other, put out of every fire and every house to walk the high ridges alone until the world ends. She cries like a woman because she remembers being one, and she calls you in the voices she hears, because she is lonesome, and because lonesome is hungry, and there is no longer any difference between the two in her. Darrell, who had laughed at all of it that very afternoon, did not laugh now. He asked Norman the only question that mattered. He asked how his grandfather said you got away from it. You do not answer, Norman said. You do not run. Running makes you prey, and answering makes you hers. You go still and you go heavy and you let it pass, and you do that until the sun comes up, because she cannot abide the open day. She is a creature of the gray hours. So we tried. We banked the fire high, and we sat with our backs to it in a tight ring facing out, and we did not speak above a whisper, and we did not answer the voice. And the voice worked at us all night. That is the part I cannot make anyone understand who was not there. It was patient. It would go quiet for 20 minutes, long enough that hope would creep back in and somebody would let out a breath. And then it would speak again from a new place, closer, in a new voice. It learned Brooke's name from the way Norman whispered it. Then it had Irene's. Then it was calling all of us, working through the camp, and the cruelty of it was how well it did the voices. It called Brooke in Norman's voice, gentle and tired, telling her it was all right now, that she could come help him to the creek. It called Alvin in a woman's voice none of us knew, and Alvin's face went to pieces, and Darrell had to grip his arm because I think it had found something true and old and grieving in Alvin and was pulling on it. Irene's hearing aid was doing something then that I have never been able to explain and have never tried to. The buzz she had complained about on the trail had become a steady rising whine, and she had taken the device out and was holding it in her open palm, staring at it because it had begun to make a sound on its own, a thin, far-carrying note, the same note, I realized, that lived at the bottom of the woman's cry, as if the thing out in the laurel and the little machine in her hand were tuned to one another, and the closer it came, the louder the machine sang. She set it down on the log very carefully, the way you set down something you are afraid of, and after that she could hardly hear us at all, and I think that was the only thing that kept her whole. She spent the rest of the night reading our faces in the firelight, and our faces told her everything she needed to know and nothing she could not bear. We learned the thing's patience that night the way you learn the temper of a flood. It did not rush. It would go silent for a stretch long enough that the worst of the fear would loosen its grip, long enough that Brooke would let out a slow breath and Alvin would lower the rifle an inch. And then it would speak from a place none of us were watching, closer than before, in a voice it had not used yet, and the fear would come back twice as cold. It was working us the way a current works a bank, not all at once, but a little at a time, taking what it could reach, waiting for something to give way. Near the worst hour of the night, the hour when the body most wants to give up, it stopped circling. The creak noise covered its feet, but I felt it the way you feel weather coming. A pressure, a wrongness, and then I smelled it. Wet fur and copper and something underneath that was almost sweet, almost like a woman's powder, and that almost was the worst thing in the world. It had come down to the very edge of the firelight, and in the place where the light failed, I saw 2 points of green low and wide apart and far too high off the ground, and they were watching Norman, and they did not blink. Felicia was the one who moved. I will never know if it was fear or grief or simply that her body decided for her, but she came up off the ground and she ran, straight out of the firelight, away from the eyes, down toward the creek and the dark trail. And Norman screamed the only words that could have stopped her, and they were the wrong words to scream because they were the truth. "Do not run," he screamed. "Do not run from it." The green eyes were gone from beside Norman before I finished turning my head. We heard Felicia get about 40 yards. We heard her feet in the leaves, fast and then faster. And we heard the laurel take her, the whip and snap of branches. And then we heard her recorder, which she had clutched in her hand the whole night without ever once setting it down, still running, still turning, capturing all of it as it fell from her hand into the leaves, her breath, the branches. And then a sound I have never described to another living person and will not describe now, except to say that it was very short, and that the thing that made it was not done practicing voices, because afterward, from down by the creek, in the gloom where Felicia had gone, we heard Felicia's own voice call up the slope to us, light and easy, telling us she was all right, telling us to come down. Nobody came down. That is the thing I am most ashamed of and most grateful for, both at once. We sat in that ring of failing firelight, and we listened to a voice we had known for one single day, a kind woman who had spent the night holding a recorder so that an old man's stories would not be lost, calling to us in the gloom, and we did not go to her. Norman had us by the wrists, the ones he could reach, and he was saying it over and over. The way you say a thing to keep yourself from breaking, you do not answer it, you do not run from it, go still, go heavy, let it pass. Brooke was making no sound at all, and tears were running off her chin, and she had the satellite messenger crushed in her two hands. She had sent the distress signal an hour before. There was nothing to do with it now but hold it. Help was a long way off, and the gray hours were not done with us. The voice came up out of the creek bottom, Felicia's voice, and it walked the edge of the light, and it tried everything. It begged, it got angry, it cried. It used Norman's name and Brooke's name, and it found, somewhere in the night, my name, which it could only have learned from one of them in some unguarded whisper, and hearing the thing say my name in a friend's voice did something to me that I have not fully come back from. Because the voice was kind. That is the trap of it. It was not a roar. It was the voice of someone who loves you, telling you it is cold out here, asking why you will not come. We did the only thing the old man's grandfather had left us. We went still. We went heavy. 6 people, and then 5, sitting like stones around a dying fire, refusing the most human thing there is, which is to answer when you are called by someone you love. The fire burned down to coals because nobody would reach past the ring of light for more wood. And the eyes came back, the 2 green points, and this time they came around the whole circle, slow, taking their time, pausing at each of us in turn. I felt it stop in front of me. I felt the heat of its breath, that copper and powder smell, close enough that the fine hairs on my arms stood up. It wanted me to look, every instinct I had screamed to look, to face it, to know the shape of the thing that was going to take me. And I understood in that moment what going heavy truly meant. It meant becoming a thing without fear and without hope, a thing as dumb and patient and rooted as the hearthstone Norman's grandfather had laid. It meant refusing to be alive in the way it needed me to be alive. I looked at the coals, I made my eyes as empty as a stone, and after a time that I cannot measure, the breath moved on. The sky over the eastern ridge went from black to the color of a bruise, and then to gray, and then the first true light came down through the hemlocks, and the hollow filled with birdsong as suddenly as it had emptied of it the evening before. And the thing was simply gone. There was no last cry, no shape slipping into the laurel. The gray hours ended, and it ended with them, the way a held breath ends. We did not find Felicia. The search teams came in late that day, guided by Brooke's signal, and they looked for a week, and they found her recorder 40 yards down toward the creek, lying in the leaves with the batteries long dead. They found marks on the ground that the report described as consistent with a large animal, a cougar most likely, though there has not been a confirmed cougar in these mountains in my lifetime. They wrote it up as a wildlife encounter and a fatality presumed, and they were kind about it, and they were wrong, and there was no box on the form for how wrong they were. Darrell took it hardest, and that surprised me, because he had been the steady one all night, the one who put wood on the fire and held the axe and said the sensible thing. But Darrell had spent 40 years telling himself he knew exactly what lived in these mountains, and a man who has built his whole life on knowing the woods has nowhere to stand when the woods do a thing that cannot be. He sat by the dead fire that morning while the searchers worked the slope, and he kept saying it must have been a cougar, it had to have been a cougar, even after the trackers told him there was no cougar in 300 miles, even after he had heard with his own ears the warm, low chuckle climb into a scream and come back down. He needed it to be an animal so badly that I watched him decide to believe it. Right there in front of me, the way a man pulls a coat over his shoulders against a cold he cannot stand. I have not heard from Daryl since. Brooke told me he stopped going into the woods at all. A lifetime of mornings on the ridge, given up overnight, because the alternative was to keep one true thing in his head, and the true thing would not let him sleep. I walked the 5 of them out the next morning, slow for Norman's knee, and not one of us spoke until we were back at the trucks and the high country was behind us. Norman gripped my hand at the end. He said his grandfather had been right about everything, and that he was sorry he had ever wanted to come back, and that some places keep their own quiet and a man should let them. Then they drove down off the mountain, and I went and sat in the office with the blank report in the typewriter, and I have not finished it yet. I would like to tell you that is the end, that the rule held, that going still and going heavy saved the ones it could, and that the cat that walks like a woman stayed up in Sorrel Hollow where the medicine man's curse pinned her, walking her lonesome ridges until the world ends. But I have to tell you the rest because it is the reason for all of this. The reason I am sitting here telling it to strangers in the night instead of letting it die with me. 3 weeks ago, Felicia's recorder came back from the lab. Brooke had it restored, the dead audio pulled off the chip because she could not stand not knowing what her friend's last minutes held. Most of it is what you would expect, and I will not put it on you. But at the very end, under everything, after the short sound I will not describe, there is a long stretch the searchers missed because the level is so low. It is the thing alone in the creek bottom in the gray light, and it is practicing, going through every voice it learned that night, one after another, soft to itself, the way a person hums a song to keep it from slipping away. Norman, Brooke, Alvin, Irene, Daryl, Felicia, and mine. It says my name over and over, getting it more right each time, until the last one on the recording is perfect, until the last one is exactly the voice of someone I love. I live 200 miles from that hollow now. I left the agency. I do not go into the high country anymore. And every few nights, in the worst hour, the hour when the body most wants to give up, I hear my name called from somewhere out past the edge of the light. It is always a voice I know. My mother, who has been gone 11 years, a friend from the search teams who I buried 2 winters back. Tonight, before I started recording this, it was Norman who passed in the spring, telling me it is cold out here and asking why I will not come. I do not answer it. I do not run from it. I go still, and I go heavy, and I let it pass, because that is the rule, and the rule is the only thing that has kept me alive. But here is the poison in the rule, the part Norman's grandfather never lived long enough to learn. The rule does not only keep the cat out, it keeps everyone out. I cannot answer a voice in the night anymore, any voice, because I can no longer be certain which ones are real. When my sister calls up the stairs, I freeze. When a friend says my name across a room, something in me goes to stone before I can stop it. The thing did not need to take me on that mountain. It only needed to teach me that being called by someone who loves you is a trap, and that the safest thing a person can do, the only thing, is to never ever answer. So that is why I asked you, at the start, to tell me the name of your town and the hour on your clock, because I wanted to hear from people who are still out there in the ordinary world, where a voice calling your name in the night is just someone who needs you, and you can still get up and go to them without it costing you everything. Hold on to that while you have it. And if you are ever up in the high country, in a hollow where the birds have gone quiet and the creek has picked up a second voice under its own, and something out past the firelight calls you by your name in a voice you would know anywhere, I want you to remember an old man's grandfather and what he knew. You do not answer it. You do not run from it. You go still and you go heavy and you let it pass. And then you spend the rest of your life learning to live with the silence. That is the first thing any old warden in Mason County will say to a green one, and I laughed at it the way you laugh at a thing you do not understand yet. If you find a bird dead on the trail with no mark on it, no wound, no broken neck, you scoop it into the leaves and you cover it and you do not look at the eyes. I had been working the McClintock Wildlife Management Area for 9 summers when I finally learned why. I learned it the long way. I learned it the way that does not wash out of a person. This is a true account. I am telling it in my own voice because there is no one left who can tell it better, and because the men who keep the records up at the county building have a way of making things small. They made this small. They wrote down a date and a list of names and a word that means nothing, and they filed it where no one would ever read it again. I am the one who was there. I am the one who carried the radio. So I will tell it the way it happened, and you can do with it what you want. Before I go on, let me say this, because I say it at the start of every story I tell. Wherever you are right now, whatever town or city you are sitting in, I want you to do something for me. Look at the time. Look at the clock on your wall or the one in your hand. Hold that number in your mind, and then leave it for me down below in the comments, along with the name of the place you call home. I like to know who is out there listening in the late part of the night. I like to know I am not the only one still awake. And if this account keeps you company through the gloom, then stay a while, settle in, and let me know you are there. Now, the McClintock ground sits a few miles north of Point Pleasant, in the bottomlands where the rivers fold together. People who do not know it think of it as a quiet place. Ponds and ridges and oak woods, gravel roads grown over with grass. The kind of country where a man can walk all day and meet nothing but deer. But there is old steel under that grass. During the Second War, they built it into a munitions plant, and the woods are full of concrete domes they used to store the powder. Igloos, the locals called them, squat gray things half sunk into the hillsides with iron doors gone to rust. Most are sealed, some are not. The woods grew up around them, and the ground forgot what they were for. But the igloos remember. They sit there in the green like teeth that came up wrong. I tell you about the igloos now because they matter later. An old warden taught me to always show a person the thing that is going to bite them before it bites them so they will not feel cheated. So there it is. The concrete domes in the McClintock woods, hold on to that. It was the second week of June when the walking party came. There were 6 of them, a hiking club out of the eastern part of the state, the kind of group that pays small dues and meets on weekends and has matching pins on their hats. Clifford Hayes had arranged the whole thing. He was 71 years old and built like a fence post, all gray bristle and stubborn jaw, and he had been bringing groups out into wild country since before I was born. He shook my hand too hard. He told me there would not be any trouble. People who tell you that always are. The others came up behind him out of the gravel lot. There was Melvin Ross, the oldest of them, at 76, and the only one who was not a stranger to me, because Melvin had been born in Mason County and had never truly left it. He had a way of standing very still and reading the tree line, and I trusted him on sight the way you trust a dog that does not bark at nothing. There was Jerome Ward, a big quiet man of 55 with hands like work gloves, who carried the heaviest pack without being asked. There was Martha Cooper, 62, sharp-eyed, the sort who counts the group every time they stop and never tells anyone she is doing it. There was Tammy Henderson, 42, with a camera around her neck the size of a brick, already lifting it to her eye before she had even said hello. And there was Tracy Coleman, the youngest, 37, who kept close to the others and laughed a half second after everyone else did, the way a person laughs when they are working hard to belong. I want you to remember them as I saw them that afternoon. 6 people in clean boots, standing in the sun, alive and ordinary and a little tired from the drive. That is the picture I keep. I keep it on purpose because the other pictures came later, and a man has to choose which ones he carries. I gave them the talk I give everyone. Stay on the marked routes. Do not climb on the igloos. The footbridge over Crooked Creek on the back loop is rotted through and roped off, so do not so much as set a boot on it, because the creek below runs deep and fast even in summer. Pack out what you pack in. If you get turned around, stay put and make noise. Do not wander, because wandering is how the woods keep people. Clifford waved most of it away with the patience of a man who has heard it 1,000 times. But Melvin listened. Melvin looked at me when I mentioned the bridge, and something passed behind his eyes, and he said a thing I did not understand until much later. Creek used to be louder, he said. I asked him what he meant. When I was a boy, you could hear that water from the road. Now you got to go looking for it. He scratched at his jaw. Quiet water makes me nervous, son. Quiet anything out here. I told him the rain had been thin that spring. I told him the creek was low. He nodded the way a man nods when he is being polite and disagreeing at the same time, and he shouldered his pack, and we left it there. They set their camp at the old field site near the largest pond, where the grass is mowed and there are fire rings and a pump that still gives water if you work the handle long enough. I helped them get settled because I had no reason not to, and because there was something about that group I liked. The easy way the older ones looked after the younger. The way Jerome set up Tracy's tent without being asked and pretended he had not. By dusk, they had a fire going and a pot on it, and the smell of their supper drifted across the field, and I thought to myself that it would be a good, quiet week. It was Tammy who heard the first one. We were all standing near the fire, the light just going gray and gold the way it does in the long evenings of June when she went still with her head tilted. "Did you hear that?" she said. We had not. She lifted her camera anyway, the way she lifted it at everything, and she stared out toward the tree line where the gloom was pooling under the oaks. "It sounded like a baby," she said, "crying. Out there." Martha counted heads without seeming to. Melvin set down his cup. "Bobcat," I told them. "They scream like that. Like a woman, like a child. Carries a long way." This was true. I have heard bobcats in those woods that would stand the hair up on your arms, and I have walked toward the sound a dozen times and found nothing but quiet. So I believed myself when I said it. I want that on the record. When I told them it was a bobcat, I believed it. The cry came again while I was still talking, and this time we all heard it. It was not a bobcat. I have spent my life in those woods, and I know every voice they have, and this had none of them. It came from high up, higher than a cat could climb, up where the canopy thinned against the failing light. It started low and rose and broke into a kind of stutter, a sound with too many edges, and under it there was a second sound that I have never been able to describe to anyone in a way that satisfies them. The closest I can come is this. It sounded like the hum you feel in your teeth when you stand too close to the big power lines. A pressure more than a noise. A sound that came in through the chest instead of the ears. The birds had stopped. I noticed it then, the way you notice a clock when it quits ticking. The whole field had gone silent. No peepers, no whippoorwill, no wind in the high leaves. 6 people and a warden standing in a hole of quiet while the gloom came up out of the woods like water filling a low place. Then Jerome pointed. He did not say anything. He just lifted that big arm and pointed up at the tallest oak on the edge of the clearing, and we all turned and looked. There was a shape on the high branch. It was the size of a grown man, but it was not a man, and it was not any bird that has a name. It was hunched the way an owl hunches, with its head pulled down between 2 folded heights of shoulder. And even at that distance, and in that fading light, I could see that the shoulders were wrong, that they rose above where a head should be, that whatever sat up there was built on a plan I did not know. It did not move, it watched us. I could not see eyes yet. I only felt the watching, the way you feel a draft from an open door behind you. Tammy raised her camera. I heard the small, electronic chirp as it woke. "Do not," Melvin said. His voice was very low and very flat. "Do not put a light on it." But she was already lifting it, already pressing, the curiosity in her stronger than the fear. And the flash went off. For one frozen part of a second, the whole tree line lit up white. And in that white, I saw the shape turn its shoulders toward us, and I saw what I had not seen before, what the flash pulled out of the gloom and threw straight into our faces. 2 eyes, set wide and low on those shoulders where no face should be. And they were red, not the green flat shine of a deer or a coon caught in a beam. These threw the light back at us, deep and wet and burning, the red of a coal with the breath still on it, 2 of them, the size of my fists, fixed and unblinking and aimed at the 6 of us like the muzzles of a gun. Then the flash died and the gloom slammed back down, and the branch where it had sat was bare and swinging, and the thing was gone into the air without a sound. No one slept that first night. We sat up around a fire we kept feeding long past need, and we did the thing people do, which is to talk it smaller. Jerome decided it had been a great horned owl, the big ones, and the eyes had been a trick of the flash. Clifford agreed with him loudly, the way a leader agrees with anything that lets him keep being the leader. Martha said nothing and watched the tree line. Tracy held her knees and watched Martha. And Tammy kept turning the camera over in her hands, scrolling back to the one frame she had taken, holding the little screen up to the firelight and then putting it down and then picking it up again. "Battery is almost dead," she said once, to no one. "It should not be. I charged it." No one answered her. I should have radioed it in. I want to be honest about that. I had a handheld on my belt that reached the office on the good days, and I should have keyed it and reported a disturbance and had them send someone with a truck at first light. But what was I going to say? A big bird scared some campers. They would have laughed me off the channel. So I did the easy thing, the thing that is always the wrong thing. And I told myself it could wait until morning. It was Melvin who would not let it stay small. Around the dead middle of the night, when the fire had burned down to a sullen orange and the cold had crept in off the pond, he started to talk, and he did not stop for a long time. He talked the way old men talk when they have decided you finally need to hear something. He had been 20 years old in the winter of 1967. He told us about it slow. He told us how that whole year the county had been wrong. How people had seen the thing out at the old powder works, the very igloos that still sat in the woods around us. How it had chased cars on the river road with its wings spread wide enough to blot out the sky behind them. He told us how no one was believed and how no one was helped, and how the men who came to study it filled out their forms and went home. And then he told us about the bridge. December, he said, right before Christmas. The Silver Bridge, they called it, carried the road clean across the Ohio into the next state, full of cars. End of the day, everybody headed home with their parcels. He stopped. He looked at the fire for a while. It just let go, the whole span, folded up and dropped every soul on it into the river in the cold. My cousin was 2 cars back. 2 cars. He sat on the bank for the longest time and could not make his legs work. Tracy made a small sound. Martha put a hand on her arm. "Here is the part nobody wants," Melvin said. After, when they got to asking who saw what, turned out half the county had been seeing that thing for a year, out at the powder works on the river road, and folks decided afterward that it had not been hunting anybody at all. He turned his head and looked at each of us in the fire glow, slow, one at a time. It was warning us. That is what the old ones came to believe. It does not come to hunt, it comes to warn. And the worst mistake a person can make is to take the warning for the danger. The fire popped. Somewhere out past the pond, a single frog started up and then thought better of it. "So if you saw it tonight," Melvin finished, "then the question is not how do we get away from it. The question is what is it pointing at? Because that thing is a finger, friends. And a finger always points at something worse than itself." Clifford told him to quit it. He said he was frightening Tracy. But Tracy was not the only one who was frightened, and Clifford's voice had a crack down the middle of it, and we all heard the crack. I did not sleep. I sat with my back to the pump, and I watched the woods turn from black to gray. And when the light finally came up thin and milky over the eastern ridge, I made the only good decision I made that whole week. I told them we were going out, all of them. Pack it up, leave the heavy gear. We would walk the access road to the lot, and I would drive them to the office, and that would be the end of their week in the McClintock woods. Clifford argued. Of course he argued. But Melvin backed me, and Martha backed Melvin, and the leader saw which way the group had turned, and he folded the way men like that always fold, all at once, and pretending it had been his idea. That is when we found the birds. They were in the grass between the camp and the road, a scatter of them. Songbirds mostly. A few we could not name. Maybe 20. They lay where they had fallen, with their wings folded neat against their sides, and not a mark on a single one, no blood, no broken bone, nothing a fox or a hawk would leave. They had simply dropped out of the air in the night and died. Cammy crouched to photograph them, and I told her to leave them, and I remembered what the old warden had told me on my first summer, and for the first time in 9 years I understood it in my body and not just my head. You bury the birds, you do not look at the eyes. I made them step around the little bodies, and I did not let anyone look too long. And I felt the morning go cold in my chest. We had been on the access road maybe a quarter mile, walking fast and close, when the engine of the day caught fire behind us. I do not have a better way to say it. There came a roar out of the woods to our right, a beating, a pressure, that same teeth hum from the night before, but 10 times the size of it. And the air itself seemed to bend. Tracy screamed. We all turned, and it came up out of the gap in the trees where the old rail spur runs, low and fast, faster than anything that size has any right to move, with its wings out to their full reach, and I will tell you that the span of them put a shadow across all 6 of us at once on a road wide enough for a truck. I have tried for years to describe those wings. They were not feathered like a bird and not skinned like a bat. They were something between, gray going to brown, ribbed, and they did not flap so much as pull, hauling the body through the air in great silent grabs that should have made a wind and did not. The body hung beneath, man-sized, 2 legs drawn up, and the head, if it had one, was lost down between the shoulders where those 2 red eyes burned, fixed on us, tracking us, as it banked over the road and rose and came around for another pass. "Off the road," I shouted. "Trees, get into the trees. It cannot follow into the close trees. Go." We ran. We broke off the open road into the thick young oak and hickory where the branches knit together overhead, and behind us I heard it strike the canopy where we had gone in, heard the snap of limbs and that pressure roar, and then we were running blind through brush that whipped our faces and tore at the packs we had been fools to bring. I lost the road. I lost my bearings. I am ashamed to say it, but in those first minutes I lost everything a warden is supposed to keep, and I ran like a deer with the rest of them, and the only thing in my whole mind was the size of that shadow on the road. When we finally stopped it was because Melvin could not go on. He had a hand pressed flat against the center of his chest, and his face had gone the gray of old ash, and his lips were a color I did not like. He went down onto one knee in the leaf litter, and Martha was on him at once, her hand digging into his shirt pocket. "Pills," she was saying. "Melvin, where are the pills, the little ones, the ones for your heart?" His hand fumbled and found the small brown bottle, and she shook 2 of the tablets out and put them under his tongue herself, and we crouched in a ring around him in the green murk and waited to see if the oldest of us was going to die in the dirt. He did not. The color came back into his face by inches, but he could not run again, not properly, not for a while. And I understood then that we were not going to walk out the way we had walked in. We were deep in the woods now, off any trail, and the canopy was thick, and the light came down green and dim. The thing could not get to us under the close trees, that much had held true, but it was not gone. We could feel it. Every few minutes that hum would build in the air, and we would freeze and stare up through the leaves, and twice we saw it pass over the canopy as a great gliding shadow, slow, patient, quartering the woods the way I have watched a harrier quarter a field, working a pattern, waiting for us to break cover. We tried in those long green hours to find a way of moving that the thing could not read. We went low. We went slow. We picked the densest cover we could string together, and we crawled under it on our hands and knees with the wet leaf mold soaking through to the skin. And every time we thought we had lost it, every time the hum had been gone long enough for hope to start up again in somebody's chest, it would return. Not loud. That was the part that hollowed you out. It did not come roaring. It came as a change in the air, a thickening, that pressure settling over the canopy like a hand laid flat on the top of your head. And you would look up and see the shadow slide across the leaves, unhurried, taking its time, and you would understand all over again that it knew exactly where you were and was simply waiting for the ground to do its work. Cammy stopped taking pictures. I noticed that more than anything, the woman who had lifted that camera at a dead bird and a screaming tree now kept it pressed against her chest with both arms wrapped around it, the screen gone black, the battery long dead, holding it the way a child holds a thing that used to make them feel safe. Once she whispered to me that the last frame, the one she took of the eyes, had not come out as a bird at all. I told her not to tell me what it had come out as. I did not want it in my head. I have wondered ever since what was on that camera when the slope took it. And I am glad, on the whole, that I will never know. "It is hurting us," Martha said quietly, so the others would not hear. She had seen it, too. "It keeps us off the open ground. It keeps pushing us back from the road." "Pushing us where?" I said. She did not answer. She did not have to, because that was when, through a gap in the brush, I saw the dome, one of the old igloos. The concrete sat there and the green half buried in the hillside, its iron door hanging open on one hinge into a black mouth, and the ground around it was beaten bare. We had been driven slow and steady over the last hour, toward the one place in all those woods where the canopy opened up around a thing the trees would not grow on. Open ground. The only open ground for half a mile. And the cold understanding came up through me all at once. The thing Melvin had said by the fire turned over and made into a trap. It was not chasing us into the woods. It was driving us into the open. And behind me, where I had told them all to wait, I heard Tracy say in a small, bright voice that did not understand yet what it was saying, "Oh, good shelter, we can hide in there until dark." I want to tell you that I knew the right answer at once. I did not. I stood at the edge of that bare ground and I looked at the open iron door of the igloo, that black mouth in the concrete, and every tired and frightened part of me wanted to do exactly what Tracy had said. Get inside the dome, pull the door, put 2 feet of poured concrete between us and the thing in the air. It would have felt like safety. That is the cruelest kind of trap, the kind that feels like safety. It was Melvin who stopped me, even half dead in the leaves, even with his hand still on his chest. He caught my sleeve when I took a step toward the open ground, and he pulled with what little he had. "Son," he said, "what did I tell you it does?" "It warns," I said. "It warns. So look. Look at what it has been pointing at all this time and quit looking at the thing itself." His grip tightened. "It has spent 2 days keeping us off the road and pushing us at that hole in the ground. A thing that wants you dead does not work that hard to put you in a fortress. So ask yourself, what is wrong with the fortress?" And I made myself look at the dome the way I should have looked from the start. The iron door hanging open, the bare beaten ground, and the cracks. I saw them then, now that I was looking for the danger instead of the safety. Great seams running up the curve of the old concrete, and a slow wet stain weeping out of the base of it where groundwater had been working at the footings for 80 years, and the way the whole hillside above it bulged and slumped where the rain that spring had not been as thin as I told Melvin it was. That igloo was a held breath. That igloo was waiting for one hard push to come down on whatever stood inside it, and I thought of the creek that ran too quiet, the creek Melvin said you used to hear from the road, and I understood that the water had not gone away. It had gone underground. It had spent 40 years hollowing out the ground under these hills, and the wet spring had filled those hollows, and the whole slope was one heavy rain from giving way. "Back," I said, "away from the dome. Nobody goes inside. Back into the trees now. And we go uphill. We get on the high ground. We get off this slope." Clifford fought me. God help him even then. With the shadow passing over us, he fought me. Because uphill was away from the lot and away from his truck and away from the plan he had made. And a man like that would rather die on his own map than live on someone else's. I did not have time to be gentle. I got a fist in his collar and I put my face into his and I told him that if he set one boot toward that concrete, I would leave him to it. And something in my voice finally reached him, and he came. We climbed. Melvin could barely walk, and Jerome simply picked him up, all 76 years of him, and carried him on his back up that slope through the brush while the rest of us hauled at branches to clear the way. The hum built and faded and built. Twice the shadow slid over the canopy, and we froze against the trunks of the biggest oaks we could find, the trees too close and tall for it to reach us. And twice it pulled away to circle. It would not come down into the close timber. It had never once come down into the close timber. It only ever waited for us in the open. And the rain came. Of course it came. It had been building in the west all afternoon, and it broke over the ridge in a gray wall, warm and heavy, the kind of June rain that falls like it is being poured out of a bucket. Within minutes, the ground was running with it. Within minutes, I could hear, below us now, down where we had been, a new sound rising up out of the earth. A groan, a grinding, the sound of a great deal of water finding the hollows it had spent 40 years carving, and the slope beginning at last to move. We were on the high ground when the hillside let go. I did not see it. I heard it. I felt it come up through the soles of my boots, a deep tearing roar that had nothing to do with the thing in the sky. The sound of a quarter-acre of saturated earth sliding all at once down toward the bottoms, and I knew without looking that the old concrete dome had gone down with it, that the black mouth we had nearly walked into had filled with mud and stone and 12 feet of moving hillside, that if 6 tired people had been crouched inside that fortress waiting for nightfall, there would have been nothing left of them to bury. Melvin had been right. He had been right by the fire on the first night, and he had been right with his hand on my sleeve at the edge of the bare ground. It does not come to hunt, it comes to warn. And we, this time, by the thinnest margin, had not taken the warning for the danger. The thing in the sky went up. That is the only way I can put it. As the slope came down, the shadow rose, up through the rain, up past the canopy, climbing in those great silent pulls until it was a dark mark against the gray belly of the storm. And then it was nothing, and the woods around us filled up with the ordinary roar of falling water and the small voices of 6 people who could not yet believe they were alive. We came out near dusk, soaked and shaking, on the far ridge road 2 miles from where we had started, and a county truck found us walking in the last of the light. They wrapped us in blankets. They asked questions I did not answer well. And in the days after, when the slip was surveyed and the buried dome was found and the report was written, the word they wrote down was the word that means nothing. Landslide, heavy rain, unstable historic structure. They filed it where no one would read it. They made it small. But I told you at the start that I was the one who carried the radio. And I have not finished, because the part that I carry, the part that does not wash out, came later. And it is the reason I am telling you any of this at all. Tracy Coleman did not die in the woods. None of them did. We all walked out. I counted them onto that truck myself, the way Martha had counted heads all week, 6 living people. And I let myself believe it was over and that Melvin's warning had been kept. 3 weeks later, the eastern part of the state had its own bad night. A bridge on the interstate, an old span everyone knew was tired, came down at the end of a working day with the traffic backed up on it bumper to bumper in the heat. It was on every channel. They are still arguing about the steel, and among the names they read out, slow in that voice they use, were 2 I knew. They had been driving home together from one of their club's weekend meets, Clifford Hayes, Tracy Coleman, the oldest of the way they organized things and the youngest of the way they laughed a half-second late. 2 cars onto the span when it let go, and I sat there in front of the screen and I felt the floor of the whole world tilt. Because I finally understood the thing that Melvin had been trying to tell us, the thing I had been so proud of myself for getting right. I had gotten it wrong. I had spent 2 days and 2 nights so fixed on the dome, on the slope, on the danger I could see, that I had decided the warning was about the hillside. I closed the case in my own mind. I took the warning, and I spent it, and I aimed it at the one disaster I had the power to walk away from. And I told myself I had read it true. But a finger that big does not point at one thing. It had been pointing the whole time at every soul in that field, down a road and 3 weeks long, at a tired bridge in another county that no warden could ever have walked them away from. I had done the very thing the old man warned me not to do, the worst mistake a person can make. I had taken the warning for the danger. I had thought, because I survived the woods, that I had beaten it. You do not beat it. It is not the kind of thing you beat. It only ever shows you that the ground you are standing on was never as solid as you believed, and then it leaves you to find out the rest on your own time. So here is what I will leave you with, you who are out there in the late part of the night in whatever town you wrote down for me below. If you are ever in country you do not know, and the birds go quiet all at once, and the water that should be loud has gone still, and you feel a watching come down on you out of the high branches like a draft from a door at your back, do not run from it, do not raise a light to it, and whatever you do, do not be proud enough to think you have understood what it came to say, because the thing on the bridge road does not come to hunt you. It comes to warn you, and it is already too late.